Greetings! In this video we will create a basic robot rig. Then we'll animate that rig with a progressive fall-off type chain reaction which will create the appearance of a crash. And as you can see from these two examples, you can build your geometry very simply, like the block robot on the left, or something a little bit more complex like the robot on the right. But we're concentrating here on the rig and the animation, not so much on the geometry for this particular lesson. All right, let's get started. We'll begin with a new scene, File, New Scene, and we're going to come into the rigging mode, Rigging, and we'll open the Create Joints dialog box under Skeleton. And we want to make sure that Orient Joint to World is on. I'll hit Reset, and you can see that by default, it's a local axis. And we're going to work just straight up and down with these robots with Orient Joint to the World. So make sure that's selected. We'll jump into the front view, make sure you're in the front view, and we're going to build three joint chains. This is as simple a biped as you could create. We'll start here right at the origin and we'll create our spine, which is a simple version. It will have our root, so I've grid snapped there right at the origin. Come up about 3 units and grid snap again. This will be our waist, and we're skipping a spine coming all the way up to a neck. So we have, and when we're done, we'll hit return. Look in your outliner, you can hold down the shift key when you click on plus, and it will open. And we see our 3 joints there. Our root pelvis, our waist, and then our neck. We'll come and we'll create a second chain as our arm. We could build this out, but I think it'll be helpful to build the 3 chains separately and then to connect them or parent them together. We'll come out for a shoulder, let's say about 5 units here. We'll grid snap, we'll come down to an elbow, and then down to a wrist. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. Only thing that really matters is that they're grid snapped straight up and down. In subsequent lessons, we'll obviously learn how to create flared geometry. But for this one, to keep things as simple as possible for our first go round, we'll just build everything straight up and down. All right, and then finally our leg, we hit return when we were done. We can hit the shift key to see that. We've got 4, 5, and 6 now, right? 2 separate chains. And we'll create our hip, let's say about here, and we'll come down to a knee. Important thing is that you're grid snapping straight up and down, and then down to an ankle. And again, we'll hit return when we're done. Now note that our spine, our central or first joint chain, we visually went up. The pelvis and then the waist and then the neck are going in this direction, whereas the limbs are coming down. Shoulder is the parent to the elbow, elbow is the parent to the wrist, the hip is the parent to the knee is the parent to the ankle. So those are our 3 joint chains. Take a look there, and you know that the parent side is on the thick side of the bone. You could save and increment and save if you wanted to. We're going to go ahead and complete the chain. We'll parent the shoulder into the waist. It's a little bit funny. If we had a spine, we would parent it somewhere here in this solar plex region. But we're going to come down, and when we're parenting, just a reminder that you're selecting the child first, shift selecting the parent. You can see here I picked joint 4 first, and then joint 2. And then you can hit lowercase p on the keyboard. I'll do it the long way so that you can see. We'll come to Edit Parent, and it created that bone. And just make sure that the thick side is on the spine side, is on the waist. And you could take a look here at how that is unfolding. And it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've got our arm parented in, and then we'll parent in our leg, selecting the child first, in this case the hip. The joint 7, or our hip, is the local root, and then we'll shift select our ultimate root, or pelvis. So in this case, I've selected joint 7 first, shift selected joint 1 second, and we'll hit lowercase p, or I'll do it the long way, Edit Parent. And there is 1/2 of our skeletal chain. Now, we will simply mirror this over to the other side. We'll come to Skeleton and we'll open Mirror Joint dialog box. And this is going to be on the YZ direction. I think the default here is XY, but we're in the front view, we're looking down the Z, And so we're going to mirror across the YZ. Note what we have selected. We have the shoulder selected, not selected here. If we were to mirror here, we would get an extra neck and waist. We don't want to do that. So make sure you've just got the shoulder, or if you followed with the same numbers as me, joint 4, YZ, and we'll hit mirror. Likewise, we'll pick the hip. We're not picking here. We would duplicate everything if we mirrored from there. We just have the hip selected, or again, if you followed, this would be joint 7. And we'll come to skeleton, and no need to open the dialog box this time. We'll hit mirror joints. And so there we have our basic biped, or our basic robot, and many subsequent more complex humanoid characters follow this essentially this basic setup. Fingers, toes, additional joints, spine obviously, but this basic methodology will serve you in upcoming biped builds. I'll let you get to this point, and then we'll come back and we'll build some just basic stand-in geometry. Be right back. Welcome back. Let's place our rig on the ground plane, or a few units above. We'll grid snap straight up, make sure that you stay on that center line, and we'll stop when the ankles are about 2 units off of the ground plane. It's important though that you make sure you've remained on that center line. All right, and we're going to create some just basic stand-in geometry so that we have something to render once we animate. And then of course you can, depending on how much time you have left, you can swap out custom geometry for this kind of stand-in geometry that we're about to create. We'll just use some basic cubes, and I've created a cube, and I'm just going to grid snap this up, and because we were on the grid, right, we can grid snap that into place. Now to make this fit, we could come and turn on the vertices and just grab the vertices and pull them up. But you'll see when I do that, when I draw a bounding box around these vertices, it selects the joints. Joints take selection priority over geometry. So what we're going to do is mask. I'm typically hesitant to have first semester students mask for the simple reason that you'll forget, or introductory students oftentimes forget that they've masked something off. And so if I mask off joints here, now I can't select the joint. So just don't forget, whenever you've masked something, later you go to select it and maybe confused initially as to why you're not making the selection, because it's masked off. And you can see now we can make that selection. But with it masked off, I've got joints masked off here. Now I can just concentrate on selecting the geometry, and we're just going to somewhat arbitrarily pull this up to the shoulder. Now we could put some spheres in here or some cylinders to make it a little bit more interesting, but I'm going to create just a very minimalist version. Right click back to object mode, and we'll just duplicate this, edit duplicate, or you could go to Command D, and we'll grid snap it down. And if that didn't fit right, same idea, you can grab and maybe we'll pull this up a little bit. And then we'll duplicate again, edit, duplicate, and we'll grid snap this down, and we'll make a small cube. I'll just scale it this time. And we want it below that joint there. And I'm going to just pull that down a little bit more. So we've got gaps. We would consider these kind of floating geometry joints, but you'll be able to see the animation. And that's what we're concentrating on, is this skeletal rig and animating the rig. And then you can swap out the geometry for something a little bit more interesting once you've completed that portion of the assignment. Now to get this over, we could duplicate, but we don't have a grid because, right, you can see here that that center, because we manipulated the vertices, is not in the middle, or it's not on a grid, I should say. So we are going to duplicate, and this is the more common workflow. You've created one side, a limb in this case, and we want to mirror it over. Now because this is not a single piece of geometry, we wouldn't use polymesh mirror. What we want to do is create a temporary group. So we'll come to Edit, Group. I have poly 1, 2, and 3 selected. And what grouping did was give us a pivot point right in the middle, so that now when we come to Edit, Duplicate Special, and we open that Duplicate Special dialog box, And you recall that it's a good idea to hit reset settings because there's information from your prior use of the dialog box there and you may not see it. And we want to come to scale on the X and -1. You know that if we put a negative in scale X, Y, and Z, we would have a perfect mirror. We only want to mirror across this single axis. And so with scale -1 on the X, we'll hit duplicate special. Now we don't need these to be groups, and in fact we don't want them to be groups, so we'll just select both group 1 and 2, and we'll immediately ungroup them. And you see we have now our poly 1, 2, and 3 for this arm, and then poly 4, 5, and 6 for this arm. All right, and we'll continue. Let's grab this piece here, and we'll duplicate it. I'll come up and say duplicate, and we'll grid snap it over. Same procedure, right? We've got joints masked off, so we're free to right-click and grab these vertices without any problem. And if you wanted to make your leg a little bit larger, or if you wanted to make it flare a little bit, you could come and play with some of those. We'll duplicate this, edit, duplicate, and we'll pull this down. And if it's too long or too short, right, we can change those sizes there. And then we'll create a foot. Now we're going to jump into the side view. I'm going to duplicate this hand. I hit Command D that time. And we'll grid snap it down. And we'll jump into the side view. And we'll put this so that it's on the ground plane. So we'll grid snap that down. Right, I had these two vertices selected. You can click on the arrow there and hit the X key. And then we'll grab these and pull them forward. And we'll grab these and just pull them down. So we just got a block foot, just a stand-in foot. But as I've mentioned, you can create better geometry once you're done animating and simply swap it out. You could delete these pieces and go to File, Import, and reparent them in. Same idea here. We're going to pick these three and we're going to say Edit Group. This is just a temporary measure to give us a pivot point right at the origin. And if we pick the Move tool for this new group, you can see that it's sitting at the origin. We'll come to Edit, Duplicate Special, open the dialog box. Now I always say to hit Reset, but we're doing the exact same thing, so we'll leave it in this case. -1 on the scale, and we'll hit Duplicate. And so we'll grab those two groups and just immediately ungroup them. We don't need them to be groups. Edit, ungroup. All right, and then let's just create real basic. We want 3 pieces here. And we could just start from this leg, maybe easier to do in the front view. We'll duplicate that. I'll come the long way. Shortcut is Command D. We'll grid snap this up into the middle. We still have joints masked off, so easy enough for us to kind of pull this down. And this will be our pelvis shape, something like that, just a stand-in. Again, you can, once you're done animating, import some better geometry. Let's duplicate that, and we'll grid snap this up. And we want the bottom actually to be right about where that joint is. Oops. And we'll scale that up a little bit, and I'll scale this and just move that up to about where the neck is. And I'm going to increase this here. We give ourselves maybe more units than we needed in that direction, but something like that. And then finally our head, we'll duplicate, edit, duplicate. We'll grid snap this up, and we've got a kind of a basic funny looking robot. We'll grab everything but the feet, and let's just give it some depth. We'll scale that, and then especially these central pieces, we'll scale those out. So we have more of a humanoid looking piece there. And maybe final thing I'll do is just scale that out a little bit more. All right, so just our stand-in geometry. If you wanted to do some tapering on this, right, maybe we want to taper that a little bit, scale this whole thing in, something like that. All right, so once you get all of your geometry, we'll come back in the next part of the video and we'll parent all this in, and then finally we'll animate. All right, be right back. Welcome back. You'll recall from previous rigging sessions that joints in geometry are parented best in a two view side by side. We'll make this panel perspective. And in this view, right, we have two perspective windows, panels, perspective, and panels, perspective. In this view, we have just joints available. So we said show none, show joints. And in this window, we'll say show none, show just polys. So we have all of our only polys in this view and only joints in this view. Now, we'll recall that we had masked off our joints up here, so we'll make sure that that's selected so that we can pick our joints. And we'll go through the process of selection. Another quick reminder, can be confusing that when you select a joint, all of the downstream joints highlight. This doesn't mean that they're selected though. If we take a look in our outliner, we can see that only joint 1 is selected. You would see white and green if you had multiple selections. And then of course in the channel box you would see a dot indicating that there are multiple things selected. So we're going to just be aware that when we pick a joint, the downstream highlight, but before we hit P or parent, we'll just take a look over here in the outliner to make sure we have the proper joint selected. Let's get started. We'll grab this pelvis piece. We'll shift select the pelvis joint. You can see that I have polycube 13. Now your numbers here on your cubes will be different. Our joint numbers should be the same so far though, but I've got this piece selected here and we'll say edit parent. And then it's not a bad idea to test. So we've only got one thing parented so far. So if I pick that joint 1 root and we move it, we'll see that that's the only thing following along. And we'll just go through this process. So this piece, shift select this joint, which is our waist, and we'll come to edit parent. You can hit lowercase p on the keyboard. And everything except the root is going to rotate. So we'll rotate from here on out to make sure that that works. We'll come and we'll grab our head piece, best done with the Q key, and our joint 3 in this case, and we'll come to edit parent. And then if you wanted to check that, you could, and you can pick two joints, right, and see how those are working. And that's essentially what we're doing in our animation, is just having them crash into something and then come to a progressive chain reaction stop. All right, we'll do our arms. We'll grab this shoulder and let me start at the bottom just because that visually is a little bit more difficult. So pick the hand, shift select the wrist joint, we'll come to edit parent. And I'm just going to breeze through this. You probably want to check at each one. I'll check the whole arm. I'm confident that this is correct. And if we grab, let's say, all 3 joints, oops. So we've got joint 6, 5, and 4, and we can rotate and you can see the arm working. Similar to our robot arm from a few lessons back. We'll do the same on this side, and I'm going to use lowercase p just for time's sake. And we'll come and parented all 3 of those, and let's pick all 3, and we'll just test. And that arm is working. And we'll do the legs. Let's start with the foot. A little bit easier to see. Lowercase p, shin to the knee, lowercase p, upper leg to the hip, lowercase p, thigh or upper leg. Do the same on the other side. So our foot goes to the ankle, lowercase p, our shin or lower leg goes to the knee, lowercase p, and then our thigh or upper leg goes to the hip, lowercase p. And we can test those. I'll just grab all 6 of these joints and we'll see that those work. Now for today's particular tutorial or lesson, we're not going to be animating the legs. In upcoming lessons, when we rig the leg, we'll be creating IK chains and some more intermediate level rigging in order to make a biped walk. For this initial foray into bipedal character rigging, we're just going to have the robot roll along and then crash into something, and we'll be animating all of the upper body. So although we parented this properly, we're actually not going to be animating any of the lower body. All right, I'll let you get to that point, and in the next session, we will animate. Be right back. Welcome back. Let's animate. We'll give ourselves 220 frames. So we've got 220 frames, and we're going to begin our animation at 100. This is where the crash will occur. And we're going to animate the waist. The root will have the translate. The root is the only node or joint that will be translating. All of the other joints will be rotating. And so we'll input this. This chart should be familiar to you, except that we're starting at frame 100. Here's our value. We started with 90 multiplied by 0.66. This is the actual value, and then we've rounded it here. So at frame 100, our rotate x will equal 90. And we can come to rotate x and put in 90. We'll click on it, and we're going to key directly. So we'll say key selected. Quick reminder, when you're setting keys, move in time, manipulate the object, set the keyframe. We moved in time to frame 100. We manipulated the object by rotating the x 90 degrees. And then we set the key. We right-clicked on the attribute and said key selected. And then I'm just going to breeze through this. You could even fast forward this section and input. No need to watch me input it, but I need to do this anyway. So we'll just go through the process, right? We're moving in time, coming to 130. 130 is negative 26. So that is our manipulating the object, clicking the attribute, and keying it. We'll come to 140. 17 is that value, and we'll key selected. 150, negative 11, and we'll key it. 160 is 7. 170 is negative 5. 180 is 3. 190 is negative 2. Clicking the attribute, keying it. 200 is 1, and these little values really add to the realism of that chain reaction. So they're very small values, but they are essential. 210, now we're at 0. We'll key that. Now our animation is actually going to begin at 70, so I'm going to type 70 in here, and then we'll watch this play. Click on this panel so we can see our geometry play. Now he's bent over. We'll tackle that in just a second. So I'll give you a moment to input these numbers, and then we'll be able to just copy and paste. So in the next section, we'll copy and paste these and offset to the rest of our upper body joints. Be right back. Welcome back. So you've input those numbers, and you'll see that from 70 to 100, it's bent over. So let's have the character straight up. We'll come to frame 97. I have joint 2, which is our waist, and we're going to set that to 0. So the character is straight up and down at frame 97. We'll key that directly. And now when we play, right, it's starting up. So it's upright, and then, right, 97 to 100 is when it bends over. We're also going to come to frame 70, which will be the start of this particular animation. And we're going to give ourselves an additional key. So at rotate x0, we're keying that so that frame 70 and frame 97 are both set to 0. Let's open our graph editor. That may be a little bit more clear that way. A note, the F key sometimes is finicky on the graph editor, at least on my particular setup. And just note that the icon here, this square, will just frame everything. So if your F key is finicky as mine has been, you can click in that icon there to see everything. Right? If it comes in kind of funny, just click that icon. Or if your F key is working, hit the F key. So these are the two keys that we just established, so that there's no rotation here, and then the crash happens at 100, and then we see that progressive fall off. Now we can copy and paste. We're going to copy and paste to this joint here, the neck, and the shoulders, which will have the same 3-unit offset, but these will be going in the opposite direction. And I'll show you how you can just flip everything with a simple input. But let's just do our neck here. We'll copy and paste these existing keys, right? So I'm drawing a bounding box around everything. I'm at frame 70. So make sure that you're at frame 70. We've selected everything, and we'll come to Edit Copy. And note that I'm on Edit on the graph editor, not on the main menu. So Edit Copy, and now we'll come to the neck joint, and we have to establish here, and that's 0.5 for some reason. We'll come and at frame 70, we'll hit Key Selected. Key Selected. And so we just have one frame here that we can input, we can paste onto. So we'll come to Edit, Paste, and there it came in a little bit funny. F key worked for me that time, or hit this icon. And now if we take a look, they have the exact same values. I'll click on this panel to make it active, and we'll press play. And that doesn't have the chain reaction. It doesn't look too bad. It'll be more noticeable on the arms. But because it's down the chain, it shouldn't be happening at the exact same moment. Or to give ourselves a chain reaction, a little bit more comical, we'll offset that 3 units. So note I have joint 3, my neck joint selected, and I'm going to select all of the keys, but not the first one, not the one at 70. And with our Move tool, Shift middle mouse button, we'll move these down 3 frames. 1, 2, 3. And you can see it was 210. That represents the last key here, and now it's 213. So the Shift key middle mouse button with the Move tool, and when we begin to scrub horizontally, we're changing the timing. Remember that scrubbing vertically is changing the value. That's why we hold down the Shift key and the middle mouse button to constrain ourselves, because we don't want to change the values. We just want to change the timing. If you scrub up and down, you're changing the values. Scrubbing horizontally is changing the timing. And the reason we're holding the Shift key is because you rarely would want to change both those things at once. You wouldn't want to change value and time simultaneously. So now we've got a nice offset, and you can see that that gives us that chain reaction, right? It appears as though that energy is moving through the chain. Now we'll copy and paste. We have that the initial waist animation still copied to our clipboard. So we'll paste it down to both shoulders. We'll come to frame 70. We'll select both shoulders, and our rotate X. And again, mine is off a little bit. We'll make sure that's 0, and I'm going to key it. So we've keyed the shoulders at 70. This gives us something to paste into, and we're just going to paste again from the clipboard. We'll come to Edit and Paste. We'll hit the F key, or you can click the little square here. And we want to offset this 3 units as well, right? They're equal distance. They're one down the chain. So this would also be 3. We'll select everything, not the frame at 70. Move tool, Shift middle mouse button, and sometimes you have to wake that window up. So there is our 3 down. It was 210, now it's 213. And I just mentioned my scrubbing wasn't working. I don't know if it's my middle mouse button. So I just zoomed in a little bit and made that window more active, I guess, and it allowed me to scrub to the right. Now, we'll see that they're actually going the wrong direction. So we want to inverse that. They should be coming forward. So where we had the 90, it should be negative 90. All of these should be inverted. But we can do that in one foul swoop. We'll make sure that both shoulders are selected. I have joint 4 and joint 10, if your numbering is the same as mine. We'll just draw a bounding box around everything. And in the value, right, here's our frames, we're going to type in a script. We'll type in the asterisk sign, which represents multiplication. And we'll say equals -1. So we're timing everything, we're multiplying everything by -1. And when we hit return, you see that those flipped. And now they're coming forward. So now when we press play, right, and they're 3 units off, so we have a nice delay there. Now let's do the same thing down the chain. Because we reversed it, and it'll be the same for the elbow and the wrist, we'll copy from here, right? If we pasted from the clipboard, we'd have to type in that negative multiplied by -1 again. So let's just copy this one, right? This has the proper direction, and it's already been offset by 3. So we'll select everything, and we'll come up and say copy. And then we want to go to frame 70, make sure that we're at frame 70, and then we have to establish the initial key on the elbows. So we have joint 5 and joint 11 selected, and make sure that our rotate X is 0, and we'll key those. We'll say key selected. We've got the initial key here, and now we can come to edit paste, and we've pasted from the shoulders to the elbows. We'll hit the F key. And if we select everything, we would want these to be 3 units down. So you can see there's the 213 because we copied from the shoulders, which were 3 units down, to the elbow, and we want 3 additional units. Remember that the elbows will be 6, and then the wrists will be 9. So we'll select it all, and move tool, and once again my window, I'm just going to zoom in to 3. So now we see 216 here, and we'll get a nice chain reaction as we play that, as if the energy is flowing through the system. And then we've got that already copied to our clipboard. We'll paste to the wrists, right? We want to come to frame 70, make sure that we're at frame 70. Key X, this is for our 2 wrists, 12 and 6. And then we're going to say edit paste. We'll hit the F key, and then we want to move these down. Because this came also from the shoulder, we didn't recopy from the elbow. If we copied from the elbow, we'd just be moving down 3 additional units. But this is the same values from the shoulder, so we will select everything, move tool, shift, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there we go, 219, right? 13, 14, 15, 16, 16, 17, 18, 19. So that is 9 units, right? Our initial one was started at frame 100, then our shoulder would be 103, 106, and 109. And we can verify that. You can select the 3, say for instance the wrist, elbow, and shoulder, and when you look in the graph editor, you should see this nice pattern of a 3-unit offset. And so there is our animation. Let's go ahead and make this window active, and we'll watch that play. And you see that nice chain reaction. Now we have to animate the translate of the root to make it appear as though it's a crash. And then we'll create a nice loop. We'll do that in the next section of the video. Be right back. All right, welcome back. Let's animate the translation of our root to create that crash. We'll come to joint 1, and where does the crash take place? At 100. So we will key this position, right? I have joint 1 selected, and we're going to be animating on the translate Z. And so let's just be clean about, right when we hit S, we get keys in all of our channels. And we're going to be more precise. We're just going to right-click translate Z. I'm at frame 100, and we'll say key selected. And then we'll scrub back to 70, and we'll push the character back in the negative Z. And let's pick a nice whole number. Let's say 100. We'll say negative 100. And we'll key that. So at frame 70, translate Z is a negative 100 units. Comes forward at frame 100, right? And then let's say 10 more frames because we want to have a little bit of a rebound. And so let's slide that back. Let's say negative 20. And then we'll key that. So there's 3 keys on that, right? Here's the position at 70, here's the position at 100, and then here's the position at 110. Now this isn't going to appear correct because the character is slowing down. Remember that our flat tangents are our default tangents. So just as we did with the bouncing ball, we'll come in and break that tangent. And you can even see that it's rolling forward because it tried to average between those. So we'll come and take a look here. Here's our Z translate. We'll grab this, right, the crash at frame 100, the key at frame 100. Can even put that right there. And we're going to break the tangent. If I just grab the handle and move it, I'm moving with my middle mouse button, it's changing both sides. And so with this key selected, the key at 100, we'll click the break tangents icon. You recall this from the bouncing ball. And then we'll grab a handle and with the middle mouse button pull that down. And this looks like the bouncing ball, just upside down, right? So comes in at a uniform rate of speed, accelerates, achieves a uniform rate of speed here, and then abruptly changes direction and then slows into place. And so this will give us the appearance that it has crashed into something. Let's take a look. Right? And then let's have it roll back into place. So crashes. And then let's say at 200, we'll also set a key, right? So it's static here. And then, right, what was our initial value? Negative 100. And so at 220, we'll also come to negative 100. And that will give us a loop. So there is that crash. It holds its position, and then from 200 to 220, it reverses into its initial position. And there we have a nice loop. So we'll execute that. And then let's come back and we'll talk about rendering this out. Be right back. All right, we'll just create a real standard backdrop. We'll create a plane. We'll scale that up. We'll right click, assign new material, and we'll use an Arnold shader. And we'll use the shadow matte. We'll also create some lights. We'll come to Arnold, Lights, Sky Dome. If you want to take a look at that in the Arnold render, here we can. Press play. There's our guy. There's no shadows yet. We'll create a directional light. And then, let's minimize that a little bit. We'll hit the T key, which allows us to position that light, give us something interesting. Now our shadows are black with the initial matte, so I'm going to click back onto the plane. In the attribute editor, come to the shadow matte and just lighten that shadow a little bit to match it. And then you'll recall if you wanted soft shadows, we could come to the light that is casting the shadows, which is the directional light, and we would come down to Arnold. You could change the exposure here, right? But the quality of the shadow, if we change the angle, let's say to 6, would soften that, increases your render time a little bit. And then it also warrants, the greater the angle, the greater the number of samples, which also decreases your render time. So if your processor speed is slow, and of course this isn't a showcase project, you could just leave both of those at 0. But I'll go ahead and just put a 3 there. And we can see that that's what it looks like. We'll want to frame this, so we'll click on the resolution gate, and we want to make sure that at the beginning at frame 70, and we want, when the action's taking place, we really want that to be close here. And we'll just make sure that the character is in frame the whole time. All right, and then we'll come to render settings. In our common, you would name. We want JPEG. We want name.number.extension. Name.number.extension. And we're rendering from frame 70 to 220. We're rendering our perspective view. If you'd created a camera, you would select it here. And then if you're rendering full screen, if you're compiling in Premiere or After Effects, we can go to HD 1080, 1920 by 1080. Now, because I changed that, oops, take that out of there. Because I changed that, I just want to make sure that that is still all in frame, and it is. And then if you're making an animated GIF, which for a lesson like this that you probably aren't keeping, not until you swap out some for more custom geometry, we could do 512 by 512. Now, when we input 512 by 512, we may have to recompose. So we just want to make sure that everything is in there, and that looks all right. Maybe we would want to even zoom in if we did it at 512. All right, now I had Arnold running that whole time. I should have stopped it. I can hear my fans heating up. Right, if you're not evaluating your render or your lighting, there's no reason to have that constantly on. And that looks good. You'll also note that we're not using, coming into the rendering mode, we're not using batch render. The batch render gives us the Arnold watermark. We're have to use render sequence. And unfortunately that renders in the foreground, so you can't do anything else in Maya. And you probably don't want to have other applications running either. So you'll need to set aside, and if it's at 512 with this number of frames, depending on your processor, you're probably setting aside 15 minutes or so where you're not using your computer and just letting that render sequence work itself out. All right, so that's the minimum requirement for this assignment, but I want to come back in one last little session and talk about swapping out the parts. If you have time and you're able to model some better parts, we can swap out these primitives. So we'll be right back for one final session. Welcome back. So if you have some time to create additional modeling parts, here we've got a continuous surface head, and we can scale this down and have that fit there. We'll bring back our joints so that we have something to snap to. And I'll just snap that into proximity. I'm going to hit the F key and I'm going to turn off my resolution gate. And we have to scale this down to fit. I also am not exactly right on it. I'll delete the head here. And I'm snapping it to this joint. So I've got it selected. I can see all three colors. And with the V key middle mouse button, we'll snap that there. And then we'll just slide it up. And I made that a little bit small. So we'll scale that to kind of fit our existing character. And all we have to do is now parent this in. So we've selected the geometry. And we'll come and select the joint. If you wanted to go back to do the same two side by side, you could. So I've got this selected. I'll shift select the neck. Right. Our child was selected, our new head. Shift selected joint 3. And lowercase p will come to edit parent. And as you'll see, that just allowed us to swap that out entirely. And we can press play. And you can begin to swap out parts. So you can make a better torso, bring that in, better pelvis, better arms, etc. If you've got time in your weekly session. All right, questions in the tech discussion forum. Have a good one.